There we go. We're now recording. Okay, so welcome to Writers Read. So this is June, and we have the awesome and amazing Lea Taylor with us, and the equally awesome and amazing Tony Lee. And Lea Taylor came up with a collective noun for them, which was lilies. So here we are in June with our beautiful writing lilies. Okay, so Lea is an author, a storyteller, a podcaster, and she's also a writing coach. She makes her living with words, and words are a happy place. She started out as a community worker, but after 20 years, she left to become a professional storyteller, and gradually writing got thrown into the mix. She's since written and performed for both national and international stage and travelled far and wide with storytelling and writing. Currently, Lea is working on a trilogy, the first of which was launched in March. She's an avid tea drinker with an eye for the ridiculous, and she's of an age where she should know better, she says. Lea, you're not anywhere near over 25. I will not have this.
Thanks, Lisa. That makes me feel so much better. And I should know better, but I just ignore that.
It's very good that you don't.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. In fact, give me a situation where I have to behave badly, and I will.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So I'm going to ask us all to go on our mute microphones, and I'll do that too, while I hand over to Lea to read from her book, The House Beside the Cherry Tree. And also then after, when she's finished reading, we can have a chat with Lea and ask her any questions that we would like to. Okay.
Oh, fingers on the buzzers and no conferring. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for inviting me along. It's my pleasure to read you I'm going to give you two readings tonight from The House Beside the Cherry Tree, Motherhood Doesn't Come Easy. I don't know if I should give you too much of a preamble about the story, but basically the story is set in the 1960s, and it's about a couple who, after a one-night stand and their first sexual experience, the girl finds she's pregnant, and the family, in horror, force them to get married. And unfortunately, it doesn't go all that well, and she ends up having a nervous breakdown. So the story basically, or the book basically, is focusing on how mental health or mental ill health impacts on the whole of the family. And that's what the story sort of winds round about. So I'm going to read you the latter end of the story, really, the daughter's perspective, to start off with. And the daughter's called Frankie, and she's been through a whole myriad of things. I'll just start at this point. And if there are any questions and it doesn't make sense, please come back to me. The problem is I know my story inside out, and I keep thinking everybody else will too, but obviously you don't. But there you go. Right. Are you sitting comfortably? Couldn't resist that. I couldn't concentrate in class. I sat at the back in the seat nearest the window, watching the wind in the trees, and a magpie collecting twigs and bits of paper to build its nest. The teacher's voice faded into the background, like the radio does when it's there and you're not really listening. I felt kind of weird and hollow, like all the colours in my world had been watered down until they were fused into bland. I didn't have words to explain it. Where to begin? After school, I went to see Patsy. She was warm in a sarcastic Patsy sort of way. She answered the door sporting her new David Bowie haircut, her eyebrows standing out pink and proud, where she'd recently plucked them, just like David Bowie. So, you're still playing Happy Families, or has the shit hit the fan? I shrugged. Patsy had seen through it all. She'd grown up weary. Being a child of a single-parent family had seen to that. I first saw it when she'd got a parcel from her dad for her birthday, some jewellery and a dress she was never going to wear. Her fingers traced the earrings, and then she threw them across the room, screaming. I couldn't understand why she was so upset, going on about them being presents to make her dad feel better, that he didn't even know her. It took a while for me to figure it all out, but I get it now. We charged up the wooden stairs, sounding like stampeding elephants, and into the kitchen. Patsy's mum was sitting where she usually sat, in her tatty armchair, reading a book and smoking a cigarette. She looked up briefly. "Frankie, you all right?" I nodded, but didn't look at her directly. "How's your mum? She okay?" I grimaced and went into the kitchen. Patsy had gone back to eating her tea, fish fingers, chips and peas, dousing her fingers in tomato sauce and talking between mouthfuls, barely stopping to taste her food. From the other room, Patsy's mum nagged, "Patsy, eat your greens, it'll make your tits grow." "How many bloody peas do I have to eat before they start to grow then, Ma?" I marvelled. How I would give my eye teeth to be able to be as free as Patsy. She could swear, even use the word bloody, and there was no kickback. Her mum might have given her a sharp rebuke or stern look, but that was as far as it went. Patsy was lucky. Even though her family were poor, they were tight-knit. Patsy belonged. She knew her family accepted her without question, no matter what she did. I felt a tinge of envy every time I witnessed it, most especially when Patsy left the house. "Love you, Ma." "Love you too, Minnie Moo." There were no words for me. I left my house to silence. There were no words to pad the hurt spaces, to bind me to something hard and concrete, or to bolster how I felt about myself. I had no sense of belonging. If my mum didn't love me, then who could? When I left Patsy's, I was 20 minutes late home. So, any questions, or do you want me to go on to the next one?
Lea, I'm speechless. Just hearing you read it. I've read your book, but just hearing you read it, the emotion I'm feeling from that experience is huge.
Well, I give you a second to breathe in.
Yeah.
That's written from a young lass's point of view. She's only about 12, 13 at that point in the story. But she's had, as you know, if you've read the book, she's had quite a tumultuous upbringing. And it's, you watch her grow through the story. You watch her come from from a small child up to this, and the family situation, the dynamics are very, very difficult. I'll take you now to her mum, Diane. And Diane has already come through a breakdown. She's been incarcerated. She's come through a breakdown. She's already lost a child. I'm ruining the story because any of you that want to go and read the book, you'll be going, "Oh, I know it all now." So she's come through a lot, but she's still not entirely stable. And in the background, she thought she was in love with someone. When she just got married, she'd fallen in love with someone else. And obviously it didn't work out. But here we are in a different situation that involves this person that she thought she was in love with. The banging was insistent. A rhythmical thumping on the front door made worse by Bonzo's frantic barks. For a moment, I thought it might be Richard. Perhaps he'd changed his mind and come back. He took all his stuff last night. But why bang on the door when he's got a key? I turned over and tried to ignore it, but it didn't stop. I tried pulling the covers over my ears, but that didn't work either. Finally, I dragged myself out of bed, pulled back the curtain, opened the window and leaned out. "What? What do you want?" My stomach lurched. Tom was standing on the doorstep. He looked up. "Diane, please, I need to speak to you." I looked at him with all the contempt I could muster. He got Sophie pregnant. He got Sophie pregnant. My mouth dried. My fingers felt brittle against the sill. I willed myself to imprint the image of Tom I saw below me, saying to myself, "Remember this moment. Remember what an insipid bastard that man it really is." He looked unkempt. I could tell he hadn't shaved. The 12 o'clock shadow was just forming. His shirt was wrinkled and his shoes scuffed. He looked dowdy and pathetic. My, how the mighty have fallen. I'd never noticed his rounded shoulders before. Daddy had always said men with rounded shoulders weren't to be trusted. They keep secrets. That's what makes their shoulders hunched. Tom's insincerity and shallowness marked him for the man he was. Looking down, I could see the thinning of his hair at the crown, a small patch the size of a child's fist. I imagined it wouldn't be long until complete baldness was upon him. It was not a good look. It aged him. Besides, he didn't have the right shaped head, all bone and shine. At least Richard had a full head of hair. It seemed like an age before I spoke. The moment stretched on, wrapping itself around my heart, girding it. Wait there. It was more of a command than a request. I threw on a top and a pair of slacks and ran to the bathroom to splash my face. Then I loaded my toothbrush with toothpaste and shoved it round my mouth. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I rehearsed the words I was going to say, tasted their potency in my mouth, on my lips, and fed them the fire they needed. At the door, I stood, arms folded, sneering. The imaginary wall couldn't have been higher if I'd tried. So, what have you got to say for yourself? He seemed to have shrunk from how I remembered him. It was as if I was seeing him for who he was for the first time. Even his voice sounded nasal and grating. Diane, God, you're more beautiful than when... Oh, please, don't patronize me. It serves no one. I thought of Carla, and I instantly felt sorry for her. I don't know where to begin, he looked weasel-like. He shifted his weight, put his hands in his pockets and fidgeted with loose change. I could tell he was frantically searching for something to say, something that would hook me, draw me in. Firstly, I should say I'm sorry. For what? The other night? For not turning up all those years ago? For shagging Richard's sister? For betraying your wife by even being here? And why do you need to apologize? Why now? Is it to assuage your guilt or to see if you're in with a chance? Diane, can I come in rather than say this on the doorstep? He looked around as though afraid of being seen, but I didn't care. I wanted it to be out in the open, this humiliation to be public. I wanted to see this snake squirm. No. Say what you have to say and leave. You're not making this easy for me, are you? He tilted his head to one side, trying to play coy, but this just fueled my resolve further. No, why should I? Diane, I still love you. I've always loved you. But not enough to stick around. And what about your wife, Carla? Doesn't she figure in this somewhere? You have a child too, remember? They've gone. Gone? I feigned surprised to see just how far he'd take it. I never should have married her. Where's she gone? Back home and good riddance. Diane, listen to me. It's always been you. He stepped closer, his face inches away from mine. I smelt the stench of stale alcohol on his breath. I saw him in the years to come, vulgar and bloated, sitting in squalor in his string vest, his bald head shining beneath the strip light, still thinking he had all the charm and smarmy moves, still thinking he was it. I didn't move a muscle. So, you think you can just pick up where you left off, do you? I fixed him with a hard-bitten glare. You've no clue about what I went through after you left. And don't flatter yourself thinking it was all because of you, because it wasn't. Tell me, Diane, I'll help you. I couldn't bear the idea of Tom knowing all my business, getting to judge and reject me, because that's what he would do if he knew. It's what everyone did. I'm not sure if I've covered 10 minutes. I can find some more for you.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you very much. I'm sure that people are moved by what they've just heard, and I just want to say that the way you read, it's captivating. It's just it's a performance of...
Yeah, thanks for making the pressure for me when I do my one. You know, a professional storyteller right before me. Thank you so much. That was amazing. That was absolutely amazing. And I found myself rolling my shoulders back the moment you started talking about hunched shoulders. And I realized, what am I doing? Oh, it's artificially kind of just because I was so into it. That was amazing.
Yes.
I just want to...
Sorry, go on.
I just want to echo that as well. Lisa got in there before me. I always admire someone, whether it's poetry or prose, who, when reading their own work, they've probably read 1,000 times already, even just as part of the writing process, you know, and maybe even in some ways are sick of looking at some of the words, you know, but can make it sound alive and fresh, like they've only just ever been spoken. And I think that's wonderful. And you do that. You're one of the ones that definitely can do that. I haven't encountered you before. It's my first experience of you, your words, and how you do them. But it is wonderful, and I just always admire that. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not eating peas anymore, and I'm just glad I'm not bald. That's all I'm going to say.
I just wanted to check. Did you say were they from the same story, or are they?
It's from the same book. It's what I've done in the particular book. I've written from 3 perspectives. So there's the wife's perspective, Diane, the husband's perspective, Richard, and the daughter's perspective. So you've got 3 first-person perspectives going on in the book, and it is a sort of linear book in a sense, but it refers back and forth in a sense.
So, it was interesting because both readings were 2 different people, weren't they?
Yeah.
And it was interesting that you've managed to tell the story, but at the same time, it was almost as if somebody else had written it. There was enough differences so that it wasn't a unified, oh, it's character A, it's character B. It was, you gave enough little nods to it. So yeah.
Yeah, it worked. It did work. Yeah. Yeah. But like I said, when I first wrote the book, I'd written it all in 3rd person. And it even when I'd finished it, thinking, I'd put the pen down and thought, that's it, I'm done. And then I went, actually, so I had to go, it took me another 6 months to go through it again and finally tune it, finally pick it. But it was worth it. I felt that it was definitely worth it rather than leaving it where it was at.
What was missing, Lee? Was it the emotion that was missing from having a narrator?
I wanted the internal landscape. I wanted to be able to really, really drill down to the internal landscape rather than leave it as an Olympian or, Olympian perspective, sort of like, oh, and she said, and he did. It created too much of a distance. Whereas it's
a very difficult thing to do because, I mean, obviously my books are 3rd person, but when you're doing something, I mean, it's the same. Like I always said this about Harry Potter is, Harry Potter was very much, you pretty much just follow his journey. So it's effectively a 1st person story, but it's done in a 3rd person way. But you still, if you did Harry Potter as a Harry Potter's his own thoughts and things, you'd gain a lot more from it. And I find that when you do 1st persons, it's so much more, it's almost like you're sitting in someone's head rather than you're watching a film.
Yeah.
And you did that perfectly. You didn't just carry on the story. You gave them what that person was feeling at every moment.
I was very much aware that, because you had that expression head hopping. I was very much aware of that. And I didn't want the reader to feel that they were leaping into different heads, even though they are. I wanted to make it feel seamless. So, each new chapter, I would put the name Richard or Diane or Frankie, and then, give a little exposition on it or whatever. It would come through the story, through that. And I'm now, because it's part of a trilogy, I'm now writing the next book, but that's from Frankie's perspective. It's her coming of age book, and that's all 1st person, which I'm hoping it will work because I haven't got the other characters to rely on. So I'm having to try and use different techniques to keep the interest going.
What do you write in?
How do you mean?
What do you write in? What's the software that you write in?
Just Word.
Oh, okay. The reason I ask is because I've been writing my most recent books in Scrivener, and you get on the side, you can actually match them into sections. And I know people who have done stories from other people's points of view, not 1st person, but 3rd person, and they all bunch them into sections and then they'll work them around. And I wasn't too sure if that was how you were playing it, because having worked in Word, I think that would drive me wild trying to work out whose head I was in at any one point.
Yeah. I didn't really. I'm a plantster or a pantster, so I don't really.
No, you're an organic discovery writer.
Oh, thank you.
This is becoming very technical, folks.
It's a better way of saying I just write by the seat of my pants.
I want a badge. I want a badge with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you say that again, Tony, so we can all accept the accolade?
And it's usually you say I'm an organic writer or I'm a discovery writer. The idea being is I discover as I write what the hell's going on. So
the same as pantser, but yeah.
It sounds very posh.
It does.
I didn't really plan the book. I mean, the book sort of it made me write it in its own sweet way. I didn't know what the end was until I was probably about a month before the end when I wrote it. And I kind of had a vague idea, but I didn't quite know how it's going to reach that. But yeah, I had lots of ideas around each of the chapters. You know, she said, see the amount of books I've filled with notes and stuff. Yeah.
And Lee, I've already told you this, but because sadly there's still a stigma about mental health, so anything that can help people, like give them comfort and insight, I think is really important in discussing it, and that kind of helps break down the barriers. And also, I told you about someone I kind that has bipolar, and it affects like other people too, their family, and they suffer and have struggles. And I think that one of the reasons I write, and I find it a really important way to communicate, is it is a alternative way of kind of releasing your emotions and helping you feel better. And your book really conveys how it affects everyone in the family. So you do that really well, how you write about feelings and things very meaningfully.
Well, to be honest, the book, in a sense, largely I've used the structure, but it's not all truth or anything like that. But I've used the structure because in my childhood, my mother did have a nervous breakdown, and it did have a huge impact on the family. And my experience of it, in a sense, or looking at mental health, certainly in the context when I was working as a community worker, all the focus would be mostly on the person who had the mental health, which is quite right, but they would kind of forget what was happening to the rest of the family, family. And I think it should be a more holistic approach rather than just that one individual, because you know, the impact is long lasting. It can be lifelong lasting, really.
That's true.
So that's one of the reasons.
I think what you've and the way you've introduced it, it's also not a book that I have a friend who's actually, her husband's going through a breakdown right now. It's not something I would sort of say, he can read this because this would be helpful for the mental health. It's like, this is a great story. Do you know what I mean? So it's organic in its message. It's about that, but it doesn't necessarily sort of have to be that reason that one is reading it.
I don't paint it up to be a lovely story with sticky sweeties and they all live happy and happy ever after. I don't believe in that. You know, I'd rather sort of write my truth and let the story convey the truth, really. So it's not for someone who's looking for a story that's going to be a happy ending. And
absolutely,
quite. It also talks about stigma with mental health as well. And I'll tell you this anecdote. When I first launched the book, my auntie had contacted me and sort of said, I hear you've written a book. Isn't this marvelous? You know, I've got a copy here. And I'm sort of like, okay, fine. She said, what's it about? And I said, well, it's kind of based on my parents. And you could hear her go, oh. Because everybody knew that my parents, married life or marital life wasn't great. Not that everybody knew all the ins and outs of it, but it wasn't a great marriage. But they stayed together because that's what you did in the 60s. You stayed together like it was a rock that wasn't, going to save you or something. And then she phoned me about 2 weeks later, having read the book, and she said, I didn't know your mother had a nervous breakdown. And I said, well, Auntie, that's the reason why I wrote the book, because there was so much stigma. We weren't allowed to discuss it. It was one of the things that you kept under wraps, and there was a price to be paid for that.
Absolutely. So I'm really wanting to stay with the conversation, but I'm also noticing time, and I do want to sort of
no, keep going on. This is mental health is way more important. I'm fine with that. Don't worry.
Well, I want to give you the opportunity, Tony, and we really are all looking forward to hearing from you as well. So any questions for Lee, just do put them in the chat box. And Lee, where do we buy your book? I've already got my own copy, but where can we buy it, and where can people follow you?
You can buy the book from Amazon, so you'll find it on Amazon, and the book is called The House Beside the Cherry Tree. Motherhood, and then the strap line is Motherhood Doesn't Come Easy.
Do you have your cover there? Sorry, I don't have my copy to hand. There we are. Brilliant. It's a beautiful cover. Yeah.
So you've got a picture of it's kind of, yeah, you've got a picture of cherry blossom, but you've got the broken words here to indicate that not everything is perfect.
It's not pretty. No,
it's not pretty.
Thank you.
And my name is Lea Taylor, but I put my name as L Taylor on this one because I've got a collection of other books that I've written under Lea Taylor, which are folk tales.
Brilliant.
And you can find me on Twitter. And this is where I completely fall apart and can't remember where I am, but I think it's Lea Taylor -author at Lea Taylor 5783, and you spell Lea Taylor Lea. You can also find me on Facebook. You'll probably find a little icon that looks like this. It's a picture of my face, glasses, and I'm holding the book up, and I've got a big cheesy grin on my face. I'm also on Instagram, and I believe I'm Lea Taylor. This is useless, isn't it?
I've got you as Away with Stories. I know that.
I'm Away with Stories.
Yeah.
I knew I was Away with Stories somewhere.
Away with Stories.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lea. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's been a pleasure.
Okay.
I'm now going to sit and listen to Tony.
Yeah.
No pressure. Thanks.
So Tony, well, no pressure at all, as the New York #1 Times bestseller. Pretty impressive. Tony has spent over 30 years writing comics, television, movies, novels, and audio for licenses, including Doctor Who, my favorite, Star Trek, Superboy, Spider-Man, X-Men, Robin of Sherwood, Megadeth, and Ozzy Osbourne, among many others. He's also worked with both US and UK producers and studios as a go-to script doctor, which sounds quite interesting.
Not nowhere near as exciting as it sounds.
It's a great title.
A white coat.
Yes. In 2020, Tony began writing crime novels under the pen name Jack Gatland, and his acclaimed series of books featuring Detective Inspector Declan Walsh and his team has a 5th book, To Hunt a Magpie, which was released in June. So Tony lives just outside London. So welcome to Writers Read on Zoom, Tony.
Thank you.
We'll all be on mute and we'll listen away.
Okay, so one of the problems I have with this is it's book 5 in a series, and the first book obviously introduces all the characters, and when you have a crime series, there's certain characters that go all the way through it. So I wanted to read from To Hunt a Magpie, which is the 5th book in the series, but at the same time I didn't want to give anything away from the first 4 because it's a continuation, so to speak. So to give a bit of an idea, To Hunt a Magpie, Declan Walsh is a DI who is given one last chance. He's basically on suspension, and he joins a place called the Last Chance Saloon, which is the Temple Inn crime unit. And they are a major crime unit. They take on pretty much anything in it and everything as it comes along. And at this point, we've had, you know, various political murders. We've had terrorism, where Declan himself was accused of being a terrorist at one point and had to go on the run. All these things have gone on. And in this book, I effectively wanted to kill the famous 5. So the easiest way to explain it, it's a group of child detectives in the 90s who had their stories written by this guy called Reginald Troughton, and they were very, very popular. And the story is basically Reginald Troughton is murdered, and it's about them finding out. Originally, I was going to read the prologue, but I wanted to do something involving the team. So I'm going to read chapter 3, which kind of gives, they found the body and they're about to go through this all. And I think it's the chapter that has the least amount of spoilers of previous books. And I apologize if you decide to read these books afterwards and go, well, he spoiled everything for me. I won't be as good as Lea either, so I do apologize. I'm just going to have a quick bit. So this is about 9:30 at night after the call's been gone out. Although the flat that Reginald Troughton had died in was in Temple Inn, it was officially classed as Middle Temple, as both Inner and Middle Temple had accommodation for barristers within the walls. Declan had been stationed at the Temple Inn offices for several months now, but during that time he had never really walked around the Inns of Court, and he was a little ashamed at the ease at which Detective Superintendent Ballman navigated through the maze of corridors and marble archways en route to the apartments. That said, he clawed a little piece of self-esteem back by remembering that he was probably the only person in the team who knew how to traverse around the inns by rooftop, Well, hopefully he was anyway. So you were a bit of a detective fanboy then, Borman asked as he approached Inner Temple Gardens. Or did you just fancy the girls in the books? Well, a bit of both, really, Declan admitted. I mean, there was only a couple of years between us. He looked up at the apartments that faced him. Oh, nice place to live if you can afford it, he muttered. Being a barrister has its perks, it seems. Borman approached the main doors of the apartments, nodding to PC Morton de Geer, currently standing guard, his immense Viking frame proving an effective, if noticeable, barrier. Declan frowned as they approached. I thought you went home hours ago, he asked. De Geer shrugged. Well, I was in forensics with DC Davy when the call came in, he explained. Thought you'd need a scene of crime officer. Rules state that should be a sergeant, Declan replied. Oh, come on, sir, when have we ever played by the rules? De Geer grinned. You were with Davy? Borman had the slightest hint of a smile. Realising what he'd said, De Geer flushed. Oh, no, ma'am, not like that, he flustered. She's teaching me about blowflies. At the blank expressions, he continued, blowflies can be involved in breaking down decomposing bodies, and because of the specific life cycle of the blowflies, the time of death can be determined by comparing the two. You hung around after work to talk about decomposing bodies and flies, Declan sighed. If ever I wondered if the last chance was right for you, the last of my concerns was washed away right now. Pausing De Geer and walking upstairs, Declan and Bullman walked to the front door of Reginald Troughton's apartment. It was easy to work out which it was, purely because of the PPE-clad forensics officers already entering and exiting. Stopping at the doorway, Declan gratefully accepted a one-piece disposable suit. It was blue rather than the usual white, but it still performed the same task, covering his feet, body and head, ensuring he couldn't contaminate the scene. With a pair of blue latex gloves and a mask on, he was good to enter the apartment. Dr. Rosanna Marcos, also in full PPE, was waiting for them when they entered. Her PPE suit, however, was a light grey. How come you're different? Declan asked as they approached. Dr. Marcos made what was likely to be some kind of shrug motion. Because I buy my own tailored ones, she replied. The ones you wear always make me itch. Besides, I didn't want to look like a smurf today. So what do we have? Borman asked, returning to the conversation. Not sure yet. We only got here about 10 minutes ago. I found Reginald Troughton on the floor, beaten to death with a tire iron. No sign of forced entry, although there was a pane of glass broken in the kitchen. Killer got in that way? No, it looks like the glass was broken outwards. Apart from the body being thrown around a little, there wasn't that much of an even fight from the looks of things. Definitely more one-sided beating. He didn't defend himself. Could he have known his attacker? Declan asked. Possibly, or he was taken by surprise and they caught a lucky headshot. You can't get through the main entrance unless you have a key or you were buzzed in, so there has to be a connection. Well, unless they were buzzed in by someone else, Borman mused. We need to get De Geer to check the other residents, see if they saw anything, or at least buzzed anyone into the building. CCTV? Outside and at the entrances to the inns, but we can't find any in the building. Dr. Marcus led Declan and Bullman into the study as she spoke. We were just going to have to rely on witnesses. Declan paused as he entered the study. Reginald was still on the floor, a sheet placed over him while DC Davy examined his fingernails. The study itself looked as if a violent fight had occurred, with half of the contents of the desk strewn over the floor and around the body of Troughton, with a broken photo frame, Troughton's blood smudged across it, on the floor beside his hand. The glass of the frame was cracked in the middle, as if the heel of a shoe or a boot had slammed into it, breaking the glass. Declan couldn't see whether blood had been smudged onto the glass before or after the vandalism, but his attention was distracted by a tire iron discarded on the floor beside the body, yet to be bagged up by the team. Something the matter? Bullman, watching him, asked. Declan knelt beside the tire iron, close enough to examine it, but not crazy enough to touch it. The weapon, he murmured. It's not on brand, but at the same time it's more so than the books. There's a brand to this? Bullman was surprised. Do tell. Well, the first book was called The Adventure of the Rusty Crowbar. The killer, Delic Sutton, used it, you see. They caught him thanks to fingerprints on the weapon. But I remember seeing an interview years later where Troughton said that the crowbar was an addition for the international audiences and was changed before the first edition came out. Sorry, what do you mean international audiences? Now Dr. Marcos was curious. Declan pointed to the discarded weapon. The original weapon in the books was a tire iron, he said. But they weren't sure whether it'd translate, and crowbar was more known around the world. Happens a lot, apparently. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and the Bond movie License Revoked was License to Kill, that sort of thing. But what I'm trying to say is that if someone who had a passing knowledge of the books wanted to kill Troughton, well, with a bit of irony, well, they'd use a crowbar, the weapon from the first book. But if they had more than a passing knowledge, they'd use a tire iron. I knew your fanboyness would help us here, Borman replied. I bet you're a bloody joy at pub quizzes. She turned to DC Davy. Got anything? No blood or skin under the fingernails. Davy placed the harm she was examining back on the floor. No defensive wounds from the looks of things. He was battered, but as Dr. Marcus said, he didn't put up a fight. Declan observed around the study at the scattered items and broken ornaments. Are you sure? Because this seems like a hell of a tussle. Just because he didn't put up a defense doesn't mean he wasn't thrown around. I need to get to Dr. Marcus to examine the body, but from a cursory glance here, I honestly don't think he threw a single punch. We're still looking to see how to get past the MacBook login. Dr. Marcus moved the conversation away from the murder weapon. It's a touch ID, but there's a password to unlock. I reckon Billy can work it out. Good idea, Borman nodded. Get him using all that expensive equipment he requisitioned. Declan, meanwhile, had carefully picked up the photo frame, staring at the image within. It was one of the first promotional photos of the Magpie ever taken. Luke, Tommy, Jane, Tessa, Danny, and Dexter the dog. He remembered seeing it as a kid in Smash Hits magazine. However, when he moved the frame, there was a slight thud within it, as if something was sliding around at the back. Dr. Marcus saw this and, nodding, took the frame from Declan, bagging it up. I'll check into that, she said, passing it to Davy, who was already taking a box of samples towards the main door and the laboratory at Temple Inn. Do you think he was trying to leave a message? Declan asked as he watched the box leave the room. The blood smear. Maybe he was trying to identify the killer, Borman suggested. Declan clambered back to his feet, looking over to the wall of the study. There's something missing there, he said, indicating a slightly lighter patch of wallpaper around the size of a large photo frame. It's bigger than the one on the floor, but it's definitely something that was there for a while. Note the discoloration. Note the discoloration, Bullman mocked with a wry smile. Thanks for the lesson on detecting, Sherlock. Just keeping you on your feet, Ma'am. Someone see if we can find a frame around here that matches this, Borman said aloud, as if expecting all the forensics officers to pause and do this. Seeing no response, she looked at Declan. Maybe we give that one to PC De Geer. As if hearing his name, De Geer appeared at the doorway to the apartment, an arrival punctuated with Dr. Marcos screaming at him to take one more step in without a PPE suit on and die. Catching Declan's eye, he waved for Declan and Borman to meet him outside. Sorry to interrupt, Gov, Ma'am, he said, looking back down the corridor as if expecting to have been followed. But there's a woman downstairs, a detective inspector. She wants to speak to whoever's in charge of the case. That'll be Monroe tomorrow, Borman mused, already pulling off the PPE suit. But tonight she can talk to me. Did you get the name? D.I. Teresa Martinez, De Geer replied, as, joining Borman, Declan peered off his own suit. Then, suitably disrobed and back into his normal clothes, he joined both De Geer and Borman as they walked down to the main entrance. There was something at the back of his mind that tickled on hearing the name, but it was gone as soon as it appeared. Waiting outside was a frustrated and incredibly impatient woman. She was in her mid-40s and Mediterranean in looks, her bobbed black hair slightly frizzy over her sensible dark blue suit and black shirt. She looked like a detective who, even though she was attractive, was deliberately trying to lessen the impression, as if ensuring that the work spoke more than the looks. D.I. Martinez? Borman asked as she emerged. The woman nodded, looking at Borman and Declan. Teresa, ma'am, please. Borman took the warrant card that she'd passed over, glancing down at it. Manchester Police. Can't see you getting down here that quickly. I was in town in personal business, ma'am, Teresa replied stonily. Heard about the murder on the news. And you're here because... Well, I'd like to help with the case, Teresa replied, now sounding nervous as she spoke, stumbling slightly over her words. I knew Reginald, the victim, a long time ago. He helped me get into the force. Christ, you're Tessa Martinez, Dirtland blurted out. There was a moment of silence as Borman looked at him. Something you'd like to say, Detective Inspector Walsh? Sorry, Declan replied sheepishly. It's just I realised that D.I. Martinez here was Tessa in the Magpies. That's true, Teresa nodded, and that's why I'd like to help with the case. I'd like to find out who killed Reginald and put them away. And that's admirable, Borman looked around the courtyard as she spoke, but at the same time, we don't know why he was killed, who killed him, or even what was going on in his life before that. And as you can imagine, Detective Inspector, the fact that you're away from your post and in the city that he's murdered in on the same day on apparent personal business pretty makes you one of the suspects in this murder. Yeah, I get that, Teresa nodded, and I'm happy to sit down and answer any questions needed. But I'm asking for a little professional courtesy here, that someone can somehow keep me in the loop. You want your little Scooby-Doo gang to solve this crime? Borman almost laughed. Be serious. At best, we'll link you into the round-robin emails. Teresa went to bite back at this, but stopped herself before speaking. Thank you, Ma'am, she eventually said stiffly, her body almost at attention. All business, Declan thought to himself. And then, pulling out a card, she turned to him. Here's my contact details, she said. I'll be staying in London for a while longer. We'll see each other again. This done, she turned and left the entranceway, visibly fighting to keep the anger held inside. Impressive, Boorman mused as she watched her leave. I thought she'd kick off at the Scooby-Doo line. You were deliberately trying to provoke her. Declan was surprised at this. He was even more surprised at the wide grin that Boorman gave him back in reply. I deliberately try to provoke everyone I meet, she said pleasantly. It's the best way to throw them off balance, see what they truly think. And that's why you called me a fanboy. No, Boorman pulled out her notebook, taking down the contact details. You work for me. I say that for fun. If I wanted to provoke you, there's a lot worse things I can call you. She took a deep breath, breathing in the evening air as she considered options. Right then, she eventually decided. Call the band. We need to hit the ground running tomorrow. Declan looked back to the apartment block. The creator of the Magpies was dead, and one of the teenage detectives, now a DI in her own right, was muscling in on the case. The question, though, was whether it was to truly solve the crime, or whether it was to help guide it in the direction she wanted. And how many other Magpies were about to crawl out of the woodwork, each with their own agenda? One thing was definitely for certain. This was going to be a circus once the press really leaned into it. And Declan hated bloody circuses.
Tony, that was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really, yeah. I'm wanting to I'm wanting to read chapter 4 now. But I've just got your book 1, so I'll have a while to wait until I can get to it. But absolutely fabulous. I love the humor. It's is that sort of tension and humor.
Well,
Brilliant.
yeah, I mean, the problem was is when I wrote Letter from the Dead, the first book, it was a lot more serious because obviously there's a lot of crime books I read that are quite serious, and as I was writing, I realized that I was adding humor into it, and I couldn't stop myself because, having written children's books and things like that, there's always a sense of humor that I play into it. And then I thought, you know what? If no one likes it, I'm just going to say screw it. And one of my favorite series is the Bryant and May series by Christopher Fowler, which are always full of in-jokes and comedy. So there was an element of wanting to go that way. And it hasn't hurt me in any way, actually. In fact, it's, people have sort of mentioned J.D. Kirk and things like that, and some of the humor that he has in his character. So I kind of just kept it. I'm trying not to make it sort of, wah ha ha kind of levels, but it's more the communication between the team. Because you'll remember by this point, everybody in that book has pretty much known each other for 5 books. Boorman turns up in book 2, but she's not really part of the team until book 4. So, they're still kind of getting to know each other. But yeah, I mean, when you first meet everybody, I mean, everybody has their reasons for being on this team, and they're all screw-ups. So they were never going to be the most accurate and professional team you could find.
I don't even notice a couple of the comments coming in. Cracking read. You should do the audiobook yourself. So, all of that false modesty at the beginning. No.
No.
We loved your reading.
Thank you. I actually I test read the first one because obviously the first prologue is Thomas Williams doing a reading at Waterstones as you find out Reginald has died, and it was longer, and I wanted to at least give you a bit of the thing. So I hadn't actually read that one, and halfway through I was going, I wonder if this is actually a really long chapter or if this is actually a short one. And I was starting a bit stressed that it might actually just gone through everything. So I'm glad it kind of timed out okay.
Yeah, no, it did. Your stress didn't show. It was fabulous, and just the way you brought the voices in, that was amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ian, you've got some contacting to do, I think, for your next one weekend in wherever you decide to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be brutally honest, and
Do it.
I've said this once before. I think I forget if it was a writer's reader or another one. I always struggle with sort of detective sort of crime fiction. I never used to. In my younger days, it's sort of where I began as a kid, with the sort of famous 5 Secrets of Enid Blyton and stuff, got on the Agatha Christie stuff, and sort of progressed from there. But that's more sort of years ago than I care to remember. So I don't know what it is, but I find it hard to sort of get into it. I don't tend to watch it on the television either as drama. I just seem to have created a whole thing for me. and I can't explain why.
Oh, I can, in a way, I can explain it for you.
Can you please do if
yeah.
you can, because
It's
I don't understand it.
No, it's because I've had this from people when they talk to me about it, and I'm in a way myself. When you read things like The Famous Five, Secret Seven, you know, those sort of things, even Marple and Poirot, stuff like that, they're just detectives. They're not police. And once you hit the police side of things, there's loads of rules that you must have. You know, there's, I mean, for example, you know, I have beside my desk constantly is the crime writer's guide, which talks about, you know, first on crime, this must be happening. There's a suit of, you know, crime command units must have this, and this must be done. So there's rules and regulations to everything that goes through. You can't be as free flowing as, say, a Jack Reacher or something like that, where, you know, Jack turns up, solves a crime, does what he wants, wanders off. He doesn't have to follow the rules. And it's why spy books are a lot easier to read, because even though, you know, he's a rogue MI5 agent, well, that means you never have to talk about MI5. You know, I've got another series that I'm doing, which is Ellie Reckless, and she's a cop for criminals. And with that, I don't have to do any of this. And it's quite liberating writing the book at the moment, because I don't have to sit down and think, oh, hang on a second. So you need the PPE suit. You've got to make sure this is happening. There's you have to work out the ritual. And all the police books have to do that, because they all have this thing. Because the moment they don't do it, I mean, like Line of Duty, for example, is often picked upon because Jed Mercurio does forget certain things, or he sort of compresses time. And CSI used to do it, where they'd go and get a DNA sort of sample, and the following day they'd have it. And people were like, this would take 3 days. That doesn't happen this way. But once you take away the rules, it becomes more fun. And so with Poirot and all those sort of things, and so like Murder, She Wrote, for example, was at the same time as Columbo, but Murder, She Wrote had way less rules.
And that's it. And that hasn't struck me before. But if anybody asked me anything about anything, or knows anything about me, they will know one thing for sure. I don't really do rules. I don't like rules. rules from the earliest conscious moment in my life were there because there were things to be broken and pushed and challenged, you know. So I hadn't actually thought about that, but I think you're absolutely right. And I just have this sort of brick wall.
It's a very common thing. I did not
watch Line of Duty, for example. I can't make myself watch that kind of thing, you know. But
no, it's a very common thing, and writing these books.
To me, and that's not any comment on your writing.
No, I had the same thing when writing them.
I got the humour, and the reading as well, and the voices. I mean, it's alive, and it's all the things it should be. I don't know. Do you know what? In my spirit of honesty, Lisa, today, for the second time, right, my hand is up. I've picked up Murder on Morrison again for the second time, right? Now, when I picked up My Life's Not Funny, it just, I mean, I read it in 2 days. I didn't actually finish it in the one day because I had gardening I was doing and whatnot, but I just couldn't get enough of it. But it's this thing, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm on chapter 3, so that tells you something. I'm pushing against something every step of the way, and I sort of wish I wasn't, but I just am, you know. But there you go. But we'll see how far we get this time. I'm sure it's a wonderful book. I don't doubt it, and I'm sure yours is as well, Tony. You see, you mentioned, what was the Doctor Who reference here? Have you written for Doctor Who?
I've done the audios and the comics.
Is that Big Finish?
I did Big Finish, yeah.
Oh, brilliant. And there's a funny thing, because if whoever was doing killings in a story was a sort of alien race or a monster or a demonic presence, I'd be all over it. I'd be loving that.
I did a Bernie Summerfield audio, which was basically about, it was a crime story, but it was set with someone who died years ago, and so I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to do, hold on 1 second, I'm just trying to work out if I can do it on the chat. So I've just placed in the chat the prequel, the 15,000 word prequel that I did to Declan, which is how he starts. It's completely free, give it a go, see how you feel with it. Because I love, obviously, anybody's opinion on that one as well, especially if you're not a fan of crime books. Because I had the same thing as you. So much in book 3, he's effectively accused of a crime and he goes on the run. So most of it's just him on his own, because I had such a hassle about doing interviews and this and that, and I wanted to go to it. So I'm with you 100% on that. Trust me, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge crime fan. I mean, I love actually all genres. Apart from I have to say sort of vampire things. I can't get into that at all. But I love crime and murder. Give me a good old juicy mystery, and I'm your woman.
I really can I make a point? I really like the
Please.
humor in
Thank you.
in your read or in your characters, because I've got a couple of friends who do work for the police force, or one used to be a forensic photographer, you know, do the photography and things like that, and he said the only thing that kept them going through it was their black humor, really black humor. So I felt that the humor in it sort of gave you that touch of realness rather than, you know, these sort of like characters that are stiff and hard boiled, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't really read that much in the way of crime. Yeah, no, this is interesting. It is really interesting.
And you could imagine the police having that banter. But I mean, when I used to work in sort of social work stuff and you know, dealing with quite awful situations sometimes, we had our own kind of sick sense of humor. You can imagine that has to be there in the police, right?
Yeah.
You would have to have it. Yeah.
I mean,
Brilliant.
I remember Barry Hutchinson, JD Kirk, once saying in one of his things where he said, I had a policeman contact me and said, I've read 3 of your books and the crime stuff is completely wrong. And this is wrong. And this is this. And that is this. Well, I ain't going to stop reading them, though, because I absolutely love them. And it's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
And there was another, he went back to me saying, well, what was wrong? And he goes, well, not really, nothing really. And it was just that pedantic, it's all the little points. In a way, what Ian was saying, it's all the little rules were unhappy, but the actual storyline just kept him in it because he remembered all that. So I try to keep to that. If I have a rule to break or a rule I don't like, I just kind of cover it with humor and move aside. I mean, there's a reason why I made it the Last Chance Saloon, because they're in their own little bubble. You know, they're kind of left on their own. It's like again, my favorites in Bryant and May, and I don't know if you've not read Bryant and May by Chris Fowler. It's a series of they're 2 80-year-old detectives who basically have the Peculiar Crimes Unit set in London, and they have this ragtag group who they solve crimes. And Ian, you'd love it because the main character hates rules. Genuinely hates rules. Arthur Bryant would go away from it, and I love them because also being a Londoner by heart, I was born in West London. I lived in London nearly all my life. Having these stories that talk about, in one they discuss about Punch and Judy, another one's the Rivers of London, and it's just amazing how they just have these things, and because they're not technically this, they can play with the rules and they can go a little bit to the side, and that's what I'm kind of trying to play with in mine.
Oh, well, it was fabulous. And where can we buy the books, Tony?
Amazon
Amazon?
is the main place to buy.
Okay.
You can buy them as ebooks or exciting print books, or they're trying to push hardback books, but I'm not a big fan of those at the moment. There will be audios. We've just signed, my agents have signed a contract to get audios for the US and also for UK and Commonwealth, but I don't know who's reading them and when that's coming out. If you are going to do it, I would suggest not buying to Hunter Magpie, but actually buying Letter from the Dead, the first one.
Yep.
Because that would make a lot more sense.
That's the one sitting on my bedside table.
Yes. The only annoying thing about it was Amazon did a thing where all the books have this lovely cream colour, but apart from Left from Dead, which is white, which you now can't see on this screen for some reason. But yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, as Mr. Tony Lee, MrTonyLee, or as Jack Gatland Books on everything else. So.
Brilliant.
Depending on what you're bothered about, whether you want to talk about the Doctor Who stuff or if you want to talk about the crime stuff.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I'm going to just say thank you to everyone for joining us, Philip, for Chris, Ian.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions just quickly before we stop for Tony, or anything else for Lee?
I just want to say I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for the readings. They were wonderful, and I look forward to reading those books. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip.
Thanks, Philip. Thank you.
Very enjoyable. Yes, I would love to read your comic books. That sounds really interesting. With the way that you read it in the story, I could picture it as comics, so it sounded really good.
Well, I mean, as I said, actually before the recording bit, I think I mentioned this. So I don't know if it actually got put on there. One of the reasons I wrote as Jack Gatland is because everything I write is Tony Lee, and Tony Lee has his own author page on Facebook. Also, the New York Times best-selling sounds great, but it was actually a graphic novel, so it's a lower bar to chase. But yeah, so if you search for Jack Gatland on Amazon, you find the books. If you search for Tony Lee, you'll find me and about 15 other Tony Lees. But you can't kind of work that one out. It's pretty obvious.
Thank you.
I also did a really good Dracula sequel, which is endorsed by the Stoker family. I'm just mentioning that for Lisa because of her love of vampires.
Oh yes.
That's up my street. Tell me
Yeah,
more about
yeah. Is that as Tony Lee, the
Yes,
Stoker?
that's called Harker. It was written. It's anyone endorsed by the Stoker family. So
Wow.
I see. That's really interesting.
Brilliant.
I should have read that one. This is everyone's like, hang on a second. Let's move the crime book away. Let's look at this.